Good morning. My name is Gavin Tate. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for RENOVATO Solution Group. Today, I'm going to be talking about biodiversity loss and then obviously climate change and the impacts that it's having and some of the things that we can do about it, or try and do about it at least. So starting off, I think most people in the beginning realize that there is a sort of collective responsibility and everybody refers to our responsibility in this scenario. And this is very important. It is a collective responsibility, but when we talk about our responsibility, it's kind of outward focused, and people really look or assume that someone else is taking care of it. So I really want to focus around your responsibility as an individual, and obviously as a collective later on as a family or even as a community, what your responsibility could be. And when you turn it back and look inwards and really look in a small scale, seeing what you could do from the bottom up, there's many options in combating climate change and restoring and conserving biodiversity. So starting off, obviously where I'm from, South Africa, looking at a very beautiful part of the world, Cape Point, my dad's in Kommetjie, and it's an amazing part of the world. Please visit if you've not been yet. It's one of the most spectacular natural sites I've ever been to in my life. Now, this is below the surface. These are the kelp forests that you'll find pretty much along most of the west coast of South Africa. And these kelp forests sequester 4 times the amount of CO2 when compared to your most productive rainforests in West Africa. So very important. They don't only just sequester CO2, but they also provide habitats. They're very important for nutrient cycling. They reduce the amount of heating in the ocean, obviously because of the shade effect, and obviously using that sunlight for photosynthesis, and as well as a number of other functions in an ecological system. So the point is that this is a very simple building block, if you will, of an ecosystem. And it's very important just to leave it in place, not to do anything with it. And it'll provide you with so much. And there are countless examples of ecological services like this that we take the benefit for every day, but just really don't value it as much as we should, I don't think. Okay, so looking at nature's perfection, it really is insanely perfect. If you look at the symmetry on the flower here, to produce that is phenomenal. And that's this 4.5 billion years of R&D and evolution has brought us to this point. And it's when we start removing that perfection that we get from nature, these are typically what happens. These are known as tipping points from biodiversity loss. So you start off by experiencing some droughts. And droughts are normal. We've had them periodically or seasonally for many years, and it's not new to us. But what we're seeing is it's shortly followed by wildfires. So then a lot of your vegetation disappears, and the CO2 emissions go into the atmosphere, adding to climate change. And a lot of the fire retardant that they use to put out these fires, in actual fact, is harmful to the environment and stops or slows down the regrowth of those forests. Okay, then normally this is followed by acute flooding. So it's a lot of rainfall in a very short time frame after wildfires. So you don't have much vegetation holding, the root systems aren't really holding the soil together. And then you have these massive floods. These can also be followed by chronic health effects, impacts as we've seen in Pakistan from last year. So this can then cause or lead to erosion. Now you can have fluvial erosion, which is from the rivers and water systems, or aerial erosion, where high winds really just blow the sand away. And essentially what you have then is no system or soil that remains for your food and water security. So we enter into a period of food and water scarcity. Add in X factors such as the locusts that we're seeing in East Africa, and this problem just gets exponentially worse. So moving to the aquatic or marine system, similarly we have these impacts and moving towards what is known as a tipping point where you cannot reverse back the impact. Starting with ocean acidification. So many of us know that the ocean sequesters about 1/3 of the CO2 that we produce as humans, and it's been fine for millions of years, as long as it has been in balance or in equilibrium. But obviously we're generating way more CO2 now as human beings, and that's going back into the ocean, mixing with water and causing a weak carbonic acid, which then, if you're a mollusk or a crustacean, is not a very comfortable living environment for you. And this is proliferating out. We then also have coral bleaching or thermal pollution. So coral bleaching is really where we have the algae and the calcium carbonate, which is the structure for the coral, living together symbiotically. And then when there's a heat surge, obviously the algae, think of a plant that's left outside without any water, obviously it's just going to shrivel up and die. The similar thing happens with the algae, and that just leaves the weak calcium carbonate structure, which is very brittle. So any wave action or tidal action or human interaction sort of just crumbles the structure of the reef. Then we have an ecosystem or habitat which has been lost. So fish, etc., cannot breed and thrive. So we have eutrophication as well. These are the dead zones. And this is really an increase of phosphates and nitrates entering into water system, entering into river systems, dams, lakes, and sometimes oceans. You may have noticed in some areas that you said this green slime. across the top of the water, that is an algae, and that eventually blooms and cuts off all oxygen and sunlight. So anything below that is pretty much toast. So thermal and nutrient cycling disruption is also something we're seeing now. So your phosphates and nitrates, again, which normally get cycled through the environment. You have a carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, etc. These get interrupted, and then obviously ocean currents as well start to get impacted. So ocean currents are sort of a conveyor belt which regulate the temperature of the globe, and these start getting impacted as well. And then, as we've seen in many cases, we have global warming and sporadic climate. Many of you in Europe this year may have seen, and the UK may have seen a very, very intense cold period, followed by close to summer in about a 2-week period. So that's the swings that we're going to be experiencing in climate change. So that then keeps farmers guessing as to when they should plant. It interrupts your food cycles, etc. So at a base level, we hit this tipping point. Now, what are the causes? I believe, as a humble environmental scientist, been working in this field for about 10 years. I do believe that it's really down to greedy leadership as the first reason. A lot of the time, the temptation for economic gain, and when I say leadership, I'm not limiting this just to political leadership. It's business leadership, arguably some religious leadership as well, where they have their own agendas and their own economic gains that they are trying to make, but at the cost of other externalities, as they're called. So these externalities may be, for example, a 12-year-old child in the Far East stitching up your garment. You buy the garment for $12, which is very cheap for a quality product. So high quality, good cost, but there's a 12-year-old child who's actually made that garment, who shouldn't be working, and that's where the profit is made. So similarly with the dumping of hazardous waste or disposal of hazardous waste, disposal has a very high cost, dumping in the ocean has a very low cost, and this is how some organizations make their profits. So leadership really needs to take accountability, educate themselves as well on these issues, and understand the nexus between climate change and biodiversity loss, because I think it is a very complex issue. Ecologists and climate change scientists need to be included in a lot of the decision making at leadership level. Second is what I'm calling the wealth canyon, and what we're seeing is this is dividing and stretching even further. It's clearly evident from the pandemic that we've just gone through in 2020 that there was a certain group, the elite rich, that gained wealth during this time. So this is just an illustration of when there are further catastrophes in the future, this gap will widen. So what divides us at the moment? Economics, religion, demographics, ethnicity, gender, etc. Those are all things that are dividing us and creating this further wealth gap in societies. And then the third one is what I'm calling incentivized overpopulation. So this is where families are incentivized to have more children, and we have families in South Africa with 21 children. It's at a time, and in certain cultures still, it is believed that the more children you have, the more prosperous you'll be as when you get elder, or when you become an elder. And this was very much the case when we were living in a rural setting, when survival from wild animals was your number one concern, and growing food and catching fish was your number one concern. So in that case, yes, it is very, very prosperous to have 21 children, but in modern times, educating those children is very expensive. Providing for them, clothing them, and making sure that they become a gain for society, it's very difficult these days. What we're seeing is in some African countries and Asian countries as well, where wives are 16 years old, brides are 16 years old, 15 years old in some cases, and getting married off very early before they even finish school. So then taking away their education, or high school education at least, and then it obviously snuffs out any opportunities for further education at universities. So breaking that cycle, moving out of Africa and Asia, you can look into some European countries as well, where you are subsidized based on the size of your family, so that you have a bigger house or a bigger grant from the government based on the number of people that you have in your family. Now, all of these have pros and cons. One of these policies have pros and cons, but many studies have shown that the biggest change that you can make, and we'll get into this just now, is how many children you actually have in your family moving forward. I have 2 very beautiful children. I'm very happy, and I'm fighting as hard as I can to make sure that the world that they inherit when they get older is a safe and healthy planet, really. So think about this as well. Moving through 5 stages of grief, I think there are different stages that people go through when we talk about climate change and biodiversity loss. Obviously, the first stage is denial. I don't think there's many climate change deniers around today, but that is normally the first stage where people get to. It's not real. It's just the scientists over-exaggerating things. I think now we're kind of seeing the impacts on the ground. So when it's tangible human nature, then obviously it becomes more real. The next stage normally that people move into is the anger phase. So you may experience frustration, irritation, anxiety in this phase, and this is normal. So moving on to the bargaining phase, a lot of people may then move into the phase where you've worked very hard for the life that you have, and you're not willing to compromise. You don't want to lower your standard of living, and you don't want your children to lower their standard of living as well. And I think this is a big misconception in this phase, because you can still have the life that you are accustomed to. Just tweaking a few things, you'll be surprised how much of an impact that has. Simple choices on food, lifestyle, how you transport yourself, we'll get into that in the next slide, can really help you. And one final thing to think about on this is when you get into the bargaining phase, obviously you'll have a stage where if you have children or if you have young people in your lives, they will get to a phase where they become aware and educated on climate change and biodiversity loss, and they will ask, when you knew, what did you do? Okay. Unfortunately, this is normally followed by the depression phase. So struggling to find meaning, purpose, and my only advice for this phase, obviously I've gone through this phase, but I've worked in this space for over a decade, is looking at places where you can help. It could be an animal rescue shelter, it could be a tree planting organization, it could be an orphanage, an old age home, whatever it is that you are interested in, try help others in this phase, and it really does help you through this phase. And then getting to the acceptance phase, this is very important to get you before you can actually be productive and take action against fighting or towards fighting climate change and conserving and restoring biodiversity. All right, so what can we do? This is the very important part. I'm calling the sustainability hierarchy. At the top, this is obviously for a privileged few, is how you vote and invest. So this is in democratic societies, and it's how you eat, live, and transport yourself. And really how, where, and what for each one of these, to make sure that we don't have 10 billion of these guys running around the planet one day, which would just be doom for all of us. Okay, so how you vote and invest. This is obviously if you're lucky enough to be in a democratic society, how you vote is very important, making sure that you're aware of the policies that the politicians you're voting for around climate change and biodiversity or nature are positioned, and are you supportive of those or not. How you invest. Some people have pension funds, some people have retirement funds or retirement annuities, and as long as it gives them 7%, they're happy. It's very difficult to cross over and actually see how your money is being invested. Are you being invested in renewables, vertical urban farming, constructed wetlands for wastewater treatment, etc.? Or are you invested in oil, gas, tobacco, defense? It's very difficult to do, but what I'd urge you to do is at least know what your money's being invested in, and then you can make a conscious decision about that moving forward. Okay, what we eat. Now, conventionally in the top right corner here is a picture that we've normally seen, is beautiful rainforest being cut down for a monocrop. So these can be plantations, date palm, etc. And really what that does is this type of agriculture stops the regenerative nature of the land. When we're talking about nutrients, oxygen, etc., we'll get into a slide just now about it. Now, options to combat this or fight back against this is vertical urban farming, agrivoltaics, and those are the two that you see on the left-hand side. That's mixing renewable energy and urban farming. And as an individual, making sure that you eat locally, eat less meat if you can, eat less beef. It's obviously way more impactful on the environment, and try to eat more venison or local game that is from the area where you live or visiting. This is really a way to make sure that you reduce the food miles of a fruit being flown in 8,000 kilometers, whereas it could be grown locally in a controlled environment. So these are options, but in general, making sure that you eat less, waste less, eat less sugar. Sugar is obviously, by tonnage, is one of the biggest crops grown globally, and sugarcane is planted in many subtropical and tropical areas. So again, losing rainforest to a monocrop. So looking at on the left-hand side, this is our conventional, let's call it the industrial scale type of agriculture, where you compete with nature, you're disturbing the soil, which has been formed over millions of years. You have a monoculture, so you're only growing one type of crop. It's very bad for the pollination and seed dispersal in your ecosystem. And then obviously it's a reductionist method. So after 5 years, you can no longer grow crops there because the soil is so depleted of nutrients and structure and texture that you cannot grow anything there. And then on the right, we're partnering with nature, protecting the soil, making sure that it's diverse. So you have forests next to your areas that you are trying to grow. So you have natural pollination from bees, insects, mosquitoes, etc. And it's a holistic approach as opposed to just a monocrop industrial agriculture approach. Unfortunately, the option on the left is very subsidized in many areas. So the farmer or the agriculture sector is not incentivized to switch at all. They'll get paid whether their crop fails or not. So this is another issue in the food system that needs to get tackled. Different benefits again that we get from soil, obviously flood regulation, climate regulation. It's a foundation for human infrastructure, construction materials, food, fiber, fuel, habitat for organisms. The carbon sequestration, nutrient cycling, water purification, pharmaceuticals, and then cultural heritage. So these are just basic benefits that we get from soil. So what can we do? Obviously, there are options. Vertical urban farming is a very good option if powered off renewable energy, which I see playing a big role in the future, especially in areas like the Middle East, where food security is very important, Singapore as well. So food importers are now looking to this option or these options. Using urban space for growing food as well. Obviously, this increases the air quality of the urban environment, reduces the amount of heat, and you're growing food inside the urban environment. So you're not, again, trucking your food or shipping or flying your food 8,000 kilometers to its destination, where it's sometimes thrown out on the streets. How we live as well can also be changed by having green roofs. Now, green roofs, again, add to cooling. They do soften the rain impact, so you don't have the surge of rain running down into the stormwater drains and into the streets and then causing flash floods and erosion, etc. So it's a very soft attenuation of heavy storms, and that percolates through, also purifying the water as it goes. All right, now how we transport ourselves. So again, this is very regional specific. If your region permits, obviously cycling, walking, and e-bikes are very, very attractive. This is the lowest impact, obviously, best for your wellness, get the steps in, but obviously it's got to be pragmatic as well. So the next one down would be your public transportation, making sure that, and again, this is if you live in a region where you have a good public transportation network, you can use that. Failing that, electric vehicles or car sharing, so Uber or Bolt, or there's many others that you can choose from, is quite effective, especially if you're doing a short business trip. There's no need really these days to hire a vehicle. But if you are hiring a vehicle, what I have found is, and I always ask for an electric or a hybrid option. Normally what has happened is I've been upgraded just because I've asked for that if I do need to rent a car. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you need to rent a car, try it, see if you get upgraded. It may work, it may not work. But yeah, the more people that ask for these options, I think the more the market will shift. And then private vehicles and air travel obviously is the final stage. The short range air travel is unfortunately the worst. So the 1.5 hour, 2 hour flights, those are maximum CO2 production because of the extra energy needed to take off, and then normally coming down very quickly and dumping fuel sometimes on the way down, because obviously the flight has to land at a certain weight. So yeah, that's your sort of hierarchy. Look at the charging stations and infrastructure in your area as well before you decide on. For example, we went for a hybrid vehicle because we're living in the southern part of Spain and not many charging points around, so we needed that option. I've got a wife and 2 small kids that can't be stranded somewhere without transportation. So, all right, so this just brings us to the close of the session. I will have more sessions after this. This is really focusing around changing it from our responsibility to your responsibility. This area that we're looking at here, the photo in the background, is Isimangaliso Wetland Authority, and this area used to be pine and eucalyptus forests. Over a long project and program that I was involved in, they removed all of these and produced the wetlands you see here in front of you today. This is just from the exotic species of trees not being there and allowing the natural water table to come back up. So if you have any other questions, my name is Gavin Tate. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at RENOVATO Solution Group. Please feel free to put any comments in the chat or go to our website.